Good evening and welcome to, I think someone has, let's see here. Yeah. So let's start again. Good evening and welcome to our meeting about the Broadway and Rosebay Drainage Improvement Program. Thank you all for coming. This meeting is actually a rebroadcast of our previous in-person meeting that we held earlier this summer because we wanted to make sure everybody in both the Broadway, Rosebay, and College Avenue areas were aware of the project and what's going on. So we are going to be going over some of the highlights of the plans that we're going to be, some of the drainage improvements that we're going to be making in the area. And I want to introduce Dan Barrett, who is with UC Indy. He's going to be narrating our presentation tonight. And also Gavin Merriman. He's with Indy DPW Stormwater. He's one of our project managers. And Trisha Graham with Indy DPW. She's going to be our construction manager during the construction phase of the project. We also have some other employees from UC Indy with us, and they will introduce themselves once we get into questions and answers when we can, reach that point. But I think right now we'll go ahead and turn it over to Dan and let him start the presentation, and then we will pause for any questions and comments once that presentation is complete. So we just ask that you keep yourselves muted during our presentation, and then once we get to the question and answer portion, feel free to jump in and ask questions either verbally, or you can also put your messages in the chat box during the presentation, and then we'll address those when we get to that point. So Dan, if you could take the lead on the presentation now, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, very good.
Thank you,
Janelle. I appreciate that introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully the audio is still good. Okay, excellent. So my name is Dan Barrett, and I'm the project manager with United Consulting. So we were the design engineering firm on this project that worked with the city, worked with Gavin on the design here. I've got Ricardo Paredes just actually across the table from me, but on a separate camera. And he is the project engineer on the job, so very instrumental in the overall design here. Janelle, that was a good introduction on kind of the key players here. We do have we've got a brief PowerPoint presentation that we'll run through. This project covers the Broadway and the Rosebay neighborhoods. And so we've got some slides pulled together, kind of showing the mapping of the area, kind of the identified problems, and then what our proposed solutions are that we kind of work together to, create this design to address those stormwater needs in those two neighborhoods there. And so we've got a brief presentation. We'll try to keep that pretty high level and kind of run through that. And then we've got all of our design plans done. The project has been bid and the contract has been awarded. So we've got those design plans as well. And so we can even kind of flip through a couple of those briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions here at the end. And maybe there's some more targeted questions on areas of interest or specifically pertaining to, either Rosebay or there along College Avenue. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint presentation. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ricardo, who's going to kind of walk us through that presentation here. So just bear with me for a second. And I think I'm going to be operating the mouse and driving the presentation while he's giving it. So apologize if there's a little bit of lag there, but we'll get it figured out here. Let's see if I can make that larger. Does everybody have the presentation on their screen there? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. So as Janelle and Dan kind of walk through, and screen you can see the team that compose the construction side and design side for this project. And just to add a couple more names, Leslie Jones with HWC Engineering is going to be the resident project representative. What that means is going to be the person on site for construction. And as Dan mentioned, this project has been bid and awarded, and the contractor that's going to be working this project is Calumet Civil Contractors. We don't have a contact person yet. We have a pre-construction meeting coming up next week to kind of finalize the schedule and the personnel is going to be on site working for this project. So to kind of give an overall view of the entire project area, we're going to be working primarily on Broadway Street between 86th and 84th Street, on 84th Street between Broadway and College Avenue, and on College Avenue between College Lane and Rosebay Drive, and the entirety of Rosebay Drive and Rosebay Court. So how did we come up with this project area? Well, thanks to the information provided by DPW and the resident log of complaints that residents have made calling the mayor's hotline, we were able to take that information and do an on-site visit after storm events happen. And with that information and data that we received, we were able to kind of understand, A, where are the focal points that we need to be addressing our efforts, and B, what is the current drainage situation for the site. So for your own reference, Broadway currently, 2/3 of Broadway drains south to our private drain that's located on the south side of the intersection of Broadway and 4th. That eventually connects through private drainage and discharges to Holly Creek just south of College Lane. The northern third goes to 86th Street and follows roadside ditches.
I'm going to interrupt real quick. It is really, really hard to hear or understand Ricardo. I don't know if that's something you're able to speak more loudly or move closer to your mic, but I'm having a very difficult time, so I'm assuming some other folks might be.
Yeah, maybe I'll Ricardo slide around. Can you hear out of my computer all right? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'll let him slide around here. Maybe you can use my mic on my computer in case that offers a better pickup. See what we can do.
Thank
here.
you. Sorry to interrupt. It just.
No. That's good. It'd be a long 10 minutes if you couldn't hear them. So
Yeah.
I'd rather speak now than still sit at the end.
All right. So, like I mentioned, current drainage patterns follow 2/3 goes south on Broadway, 1/3 goes north into 86 and Broadway. 84th splits half going back to the intersection of Broadway, and 84th to that private drain, and the other half goes to College Lane, and eventually finds a 36-inch existing pipe that it discharges to Holly Creek. And all the entire east side of College Lane, again, flows south through the 24-inch culvert that crosses 84th and College, again, connecting to the 36. And Rosebay Drive and Rosebay Court currently has a system of pipes and structures that were deemed pretty much unoperational. They're not functional. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So causing a lot of issues in that area. And with that information, we were able to identify that the intersection of 84th and College, that's a critical area we need to focus our efforts in. The entirety of Rosebay Court, the intersection of Rosebay Drive and College Avenue, 84th and Broadway, and then multiple locations along Broadway Street. These are some of the pictures that we took when we did an on-site visit. And what we see here, this is Rosebay Court. As you can see in the images, we have a lot of ponding happening at the inlet where water is supposed to be draining to and going through a pipe network system. And on the picture on the right, we can see ponding happening between two residents, even flooding into the nearby driveway. So there's clear indication that action needs to be happening and a proper system has to be put in place to get that water moving from those locations. Here we're looking at Rosebay Drive and College Avenue. Once again, we can see the water backing up on the left picture on the roadside ditch, almost overtopping it or getting close to the top, just at capacity or more. And then on the right picture, we see water being just ponding on the road itself. Again, indicators that water is not going the way it's supposed to be going, hitting the location they need to be going and getting away vehicles and pedestrians. Here we're walking down College on the left. Again, we see roadside ditches pretty much at full capacity. And then on the right, that's the outlet side of the 24-inch culvert that crosses from to the west on College and 84th. One thing we also want to kind of bring to your attention, the critical thing here is that we see a lot of sidewall erosion And that's a big red flag because with time, as the water serpentines through that channel start eating up into the sub bays that happens underneath college, which could bring a lot of road deterioration and could be pretty bad for the road and bad for the vehicular traffic. What we see here is 84th and Broadway. Once again, water ponding in front of properties. There is an outlet opportunity close to the intersection, but due to lack of grading and insufficient of entry for the water to drain into, water just ponds in front of the properties and just makes it. Here, there's again Broadway Street. There GIS and the survey indicated that there is an existing system. Most of it might be plugged or not sized properly, therefore causing a lot of ponding happening in front of property owners. So the proposed improvements would again focus along College, Broadway, 84th, Rosebay Court, and Rosebay Drive. To give you a perspective of what it is now versus what's going to be there, the current system there's approximately 9 inlets in this entire area and maybe 2,000 linear feet of pipe. With these proposed improvements, we'd be adding 26 inlets in the entire project area and increasing the linear footage of pipe to 4,700 linear feet of pipe. All of this eventually drains back to the 36-inch that runs on the west side of College and goes down to Holly Creek. One thing we want to note through the construction, we will be utilizing an existing 20-foot drainage and utility easement that connects Rosebay Drive and Rosebay Court. And we were looking at different alternatives. This turned out to be the best solution for the proposed project that we're going through with the pipes. There is a lot of conflicts happening with utilities, which we are working through, and we've notified all the utilities, so it's been an ongoing process. And that's constant communication is happening through that corridor. As well, behind these properties, there's existing swales. Those are not going to be touched or modified. Those are going to remain in place. They're just going to stay there through the construction. No modifications will be happening to those. In terms of road restoration, new surface is going to be going through Broadway Street between 86th and 84th. 84th between Broadway and College. College just where we cross at the culvert, which is College and 84th. And the entirety of Rosebay Drive and Rosebay Court is going to get a new surface. There's also going to be driver restoration for impacted areas. The areas in blue are areas that are going to have driver restoration. That's due. We're going to be having restoring some of the existing culverts and driveways that are there that we're going to be affected by putting a new pipe in there, as well as drives that are going to be happening in Rosebay Court by going through the corridor. Budget and schedule. The estimated construction schedule is about 1.5 million. And we want to point out the project is a local project, therefore funded and paid for by the stormwater fees. By spring 22, which already happened, survey and drainage, the drainage summary took place. Public meeting in summer 2021, and following obviously this one as well. Through spring and the end of summer, we were finishing design completion. Permits and bid advertisement had already took place now in the fall, and it's been awarded. And the goal is for construction to start sometime in the fall of next year, in the winter of next year, excuse me, and construction completion happening fall of next year. With that, that's kind of a quick overview of the entire project, the history of it, what we're going to be doing. But now we're just going to open the floor to questions.
And I was just going to add, Gavin, what do you think about flipping through some plan sheets? Would that be a benefit to kind of highlight a little more detail on what we're actually doing in the Rosebay and College Avenue corridors?
I think if you can run through that fairly concisely, I know there's a lot of detail on those plans.
I can do kind of a high level.
Why don't you see how efficiently you can just kind of walk through just like the plan view, focusing on that.
Yep.
And I think that'll give folks an idea and might also help generate some additional questions. I can see we already have at least one.
I think that makes good sense. All right, we're gonna kind of switch gears here. All right, so can everybody see the plan set here on their screen? Good. Yeah, so Ricardo gave a good overview of what the total project encompasses, and long story short, there's just some drainage outlet problems that we're solving with this project to get a much better positive outlet. We're adding inlets, adding infrastructure just to move the stormwater more efficiently out of these areas that have been kind of plagued with ponding for quite some time here. And so I'm going to just flip through this first P&P sheet. So without getting in too much detail, this is, if you can orient yourself, this is College Avenue, kind of running north-south here. We've got 84th Street. And so our downstream outlet, there is a large inlet structure right here at College Lane that we're actually going to be hard piping and tying into. And so this is that 36-inch pipe that runs clear down to Holly Creek. And so what we're doing along College Avenue is we're actually going to hard pipe a new storm outlet along College Avenue. And so that's going to run from College Lane clear up to Rosebay. And so we'll be on the west side of the road here where we'll intercept everything coming up from the north. And then we cross back over to the east side here to address the drainage deficiencies here on the east side of College. And that'll be ultimately our outlet for what's happening in the Rosebay Drive, Rosebay Court areas. And so we're following along the east side of College Avenue as we come up. So right now, there are existing drive culverts coming up through that area. So every house has a drive culvert, which again, with the lack of positive outlet, a lot of those sit wet. With the new storms, through what we're going to do, we're actually going to be eliminating the drive culverts in this area and putting in a new hard pipe storm system. Now there'll still be an inlet there on basically the north side of all of these drives, and that'll serve as the entry point because we're still going to be capturing some surface runoff from what's coming off College. So kind of the east half of College comes here, and then stuff from runoff from the properties will still come to that low point. You're kind of still constrained by existing grades, but the big difference is all the water from Rosebay and up here to the north will be in that below ground hard pipe system. And so then once we get to the Rosebay Drive and College Lane and College Avenue intersection, we've got an inlet to pick up all that stormwater that comes from the north, that comes all the way up to 86th Street. And I'm going to keep going down. We'll flip over to Rosebay Drive. One more here. Okay, so then here we're at on Rosebay Drive. And so this is kind of a straight shot that we're coming in here along Rosebay Drive. And on this one, there actually were, the inlets were positioned correctly. And that's the same for all of Rosebay Drive and Rosebay Court. It's not for a lack of inlets at the low spots. It's really for the lack of the positive outlet. And so that's really what we're addressing. We're kind of hitting the root of the problem with this positive outlet. But what we'll do is we're basically taking all this water that what would happen here, it would come into these swales and it would just sit in these swales. And then once that swale filled up, then it'd start backing up onto the street of all the inlets because it had nowhere for that water to go. And then eventually, I think Ricardo showed a really good picture of it. There's the house on the south side of the Rosebay Court cul-de-sac. Eventually, that system would get so full that that'd be the relief point in the system. And so instead of water coming in the inlet, water would come out of that inlet and it'd make its way through the side yards, it'd get into the garage, and then it'd make its way south to the kind of the natural drainage path. And so that's really what we're trying to do here is we're still collecting at all these same inlet points, but we're taking it to a more efficient, more effective outfall and not relying on some of that existing infrastructure. And so through this corridor, we've got existing inlets and we'll be replacing all of those. We'll be putting in, a little bigger inlet structure for some more efficient capture. And then I think Ricardo had said as well, these existing swales, we're not going to regrade, all these areas. We're going to more or less leave those alone. I mean, that's outside of city public right of way. And so it's kind of outside the areas that we really want to be working in. But what we are going to do is we're going to be picking up, for the most part, the majority of the water that gets to those swales. And so, there's water here from the east that runs into those swales. We're intercepting that before it dumps in there. We'll have new outlets at the bottom So at kind of the west end of this swale, at the middle of this swale, that's going to take it out to our storm system. So we've got a much better way to actually drain that. And then I'm going to go to the next sheet. And this kind of talks about that easement corridor that Ricardo had mentioned. And so this is going to be between its 812 Rosebay and 818 Rosebay Court. As Ricardo had mentioned, that is a platted 20-foot drainage and utility easement. So it's meant for drainage and exactly what we're doing here. There actually is an existing drainage line that served the subdivision when it was installed. And what we're going to do with that, we're basically putting in a new pipe in that same corridor to replace the old drainage line. We're going to upsize it and basically flip it a different direction. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, where that existing system would come to this inlet right here on the south side of the cul-de-sac and bubble over. Now we're taking all this flow and we're bringing it back up north to Rosebay Drive, out to College, and then down to Holly Creek. And so it's a tight corridor there. We've had to work hard with all the local utility companies in the area. We've got some utility relocations that are, notice proceeds have been issued. There's going to be some relocation there just so we can get the drainage pipe put in where it needs to be at the depth it needs to be. But again, it's gonna that's the clearest, best path for us to go through that corridor there, serve what it needs to do. And then the only last piece on this is just coming down Rosebay Court a little bit. There's a couple of inlets, existing inlets here, just to the east that, again, we're going to tie back into our system, get to our new outlet as opposed to relying on this old piece here. So I know that was pretty quick, but hopefully that helped paint a little better picture as far as what we're looking at. I guess at this point, I'll just turn it over to questions. I've seen a couple chats pop up, but frankly, I'm not sure how to access those.
Frankly, I can probably just read them because I've got the chat up here. So I'll just run through those and then we'll address the ones that have been submitted via the chat. And then we'll see if we get any additional questions. The first question we have here is, will there be any improvements to help property on 84th Street? Okay. I've probably got somebody unmuted, so I'm getting some feedback. Janelle, can you check if anybody else is, there we go. So I'll read the question again. Will there be any improvements to help property owners on 84th Street east of College or mitigation within the easement between 84th and Rosebay? So I'll break that into two. I think the answer I'll give right up front for any of these drainage improvement projects, unfortunately, there's oftentimes a neighboring street or a neighboring area that also has needs. These projects are driven by complaints that we receive through various means, and generally the areas with the most complaints get the most attention. So in this case, this project actually started as two different standalone problem areas, the Broadway area and then the Rosebay common subdivision. So those areas had high concentrations of complaints. So they got put through a process where we give it a priority rating and then ultimately take it down the engineering path towards a capital project. So College got picked up in this when those two projects were bundled because they were nearby. And then part of that was the corridor needed to get water from these areas to a receiving stream, Holly Creek, so we could actually bring drainage to this area. So unfortunately, areas to the east on 84th, and I see another question later, which I'll address, areas to the north on College, unfortunately, do fall outside of the limits of this project. It really just comes down to the fact that, we're prioritizing areas throughout the city. We have a certain amount that's allocated from a budget standpoint to try to bring these improvements to these areas, and we just have to draw those lines. And so that can be very challenging in terms of, knowing that there are areas nearby that could probably use some attention as well. But all I can tell residents of Indianapolis is, when you do bring a complaint to the city through the Mayor's Action Center or through the drainage report feature with Citizens Energy Group, that information does get recorded, it gets tracked, it gets investigated. It doesn't mean a project's going to be coming to you quickly or, in a matter of weeks, months, or even years sometimes. But the more we have those issues brought to our attention, the better we can, get them investigated and then hopefully eventually get those areas addressed. So that was a really long-winded answer just to kind of give a background of how we arrive at these improvements and why we're here in these specific locations, and unfortunately the realities and the limitations that exist in terms of having to draw those boundaries of these projects. So the question about the areas between Rosebay Court and 84th Street, that was actually an area where we had quite a few drainage complaints. Basically, the Rosebay Common Subdivision, the area naturally drains to the southwest through that rear yard corridor there down to 84th Street. And there was a lot of issues with people's rear yards with the water that would flow through there. It caused a lot of problems. So being that that was all private property outside of right-of-way, public right-of-way and easement, it would have been pretty invasive for the city to go in there, purchase land, purchase easement, and try to put drainage improvements in there. And also too, the fact that it is on private property makes it naturally, we tend to focus our improvements on public right-of-way in areas that the city already has control in terms of land rights and infrastructure and responsibilities associated with that. So oftentimes what we do with these private areas like that, rear yards, side yards, is try to capture the water in the right-of-way, capture the water from our roads, from right-of-way, and then give it a place to go. So we essentially starve those other areas of this additional runoff that, as it stands right now, the only place it has to go is through those rear yards. So what the project is doing is indirectly benefiting those areas by putting in this storm sewer system, capturing that water, and then bringing it through public right-of-way down to an appropriate discharge location or receiving stream. So we're not going to be putting in infrastructure in those rear and side yard areas between Rosebay Court and 84th Street, but we do expect these improvements to specifically help those areas as well, even though we're not putting pipes and structures in there. So I hope that answers that question. Feel free to type in if you have any additional, or if that brings up anything else. I'm going to be just running through the chat here and answering questions as they come in. The next one here, and this is kind of related to what I was speaking to earlier, was consideration given to take the work up College on the west side of the road as far as 86th Street. This is a common problem area. The water definitely floods the ditch between Rosebay and the bank business on the southeast corner at 86 and College. This was worsened by work done a few years ago across the street to the west side of College. So the simple answer there is no. As you can see from the exhibit on your screen, actually right now, this does not extend all the way up to 86th Street. Essentially, we've focused on these key areas in terms of the Broadway Street corridor there and the Rosebay Common subdivision, and in taking the improvements down to Holly Creek and then also doing all the restoration associated with a project like this, we frankly just ran out of funds available for this work. So as far as those issues on 86 and College, if complaints have been submitted to the city, those are on record. Oftentimes those are best addressed when they have other projects in the area, like transportation projects, things of that nature. Sometimes those can have drainage improvements incorporated within them. But as it stands now, I don't know of any specific projects that are in the works to address that area. So I would just urge people to continue to bring those issues to the city's attention through the appropriate channels, again, whether through the Mayor's Action Center or calling Citizens Energy Group to report drainage specific complaints. And then hopefully eventually we'll get some attention at some point. The next question here is, how will the new system connect to homeowners' storm sewer piping, and will there be a cost to homeowners, and will swales be dug on Broadway in addition to the new piping? I think this is primarily associated with the Broadway portion of the project. There is no dedicated connection of homes, or really shouldn't be, to storm sewers. So this is a separate storm sewer project. It's really just for rainwater, and this infrastructure is in the public right-of-way along roads and designed to pick up drainage from the roads and, to the extent possible, from adjacent properties. Now, I will also take this moment to tell everyone, I know there's folks that probably have side yard and rear yard issues that this project may well not address. Unfortunately, like a situation where if a rear yard is just a low area, for example, or a side yard that really doesn't have a good place to drain, we're not going to be extending public storm sewer improvements out into rear yard areas and other private property like that. This is again focused on upgrading infrastructure, replacing infrastructure, and putting new drainage infrastructure within those existing public realms, that public right of way. But as far as Broadway Street is concerned, again, there is an existing system there that basically is not doing what it's supposed to do. And so the point here is to get that positive drainage along the road in front of the properties all along that corridor. So there won't be any cost to homeowners. If there are existing connections to storm sewer, those will have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, because in some cases, they're not permitted connections unless they've gone through the proper channels and been permitted through business and neighborhood services, for example. But typically, with private property drainage, you might have a sump pump or something like that. Now you'd have a place for that water to eventually go, even if it's not going to be a direct connection. Sometimes those just have to be what we call daylighted on a property, but you would have a new inlet or swale that could actually give that water a positive place to go. And there will be some areas on Broadway. It's a combination of the underground piped storm sewer with inlets in front of properties, and also some areas are just going to get their existing driveway culverts, the pipes that let water pass from a driveway from one end to the other, replacing those driveway culvert pipes, and then regrading the ditches through those areas. We basically have a process where the cheapest way, the most efficient way to move water is with the surface of the earth, just grading things. So that's why you still see a lot of drainage systems that are based upon swales or ditches in some cases, but we want those to be maintainable by property owners. We don't want banks that are too steep, or some cases the earth's just too flat to where we can't get proper slope where those will hold water. So that's where we have to start looking at pipe systems, and sometimes we have to get really creative where we have a variety of challenges to get proper drainage, and that's where we get into hybrid ditches and things like that. But in this case, in this project, we were fortunate to be able to just use more traditional drainage methods, including roadside ditches, swales, driveway culverts, and storm sewer systems proper. Scrolling down. When the work is being done on Rosebay Drive and Court, what kind of closure limitations can we expect? Will access to homes be limited for a period? If so, anticipated time? And related question, will college be closed for a bit during the main part of the work? So this is what we call maintenance of traffic, MOT. It is a big part of our planning process for these projects, and we put things in the plans to help set the contractor up for success. But then at some point too, the contractor does take over the project and have responsibility for maintaining traffic under some supervision from representatives of the city. We will have inspection services and representatives on this project to keep an eye on the contractors. And so ultimately they're required to maintain local access, and that means access to homes and businesses throughout the project. Now, there are instances where there could be a critical piece of work, like for example, if something has to cross a driveway, where there'll obviously be a temporary restriction to the property. When things like that happen, they need to coordinate with the property owner to make sure they don't trap anybody inside, but there could be situations where folks need to park on a street temporarily. Also too, when we pour back driveways, if you have a concrete driveway, for example, it's ideal that you not drive on it for like 72 hours just so the concrete can set up and avoid impacts to a new driveway apron. So those are situations where when specific properties are impacted and there's access involved, there'll be coordination with that property owner. But ultimately, the contractor is required to maintain local access and emergency access throughout the project. As far as College Avenue is concerned, we fully expect it to remain open throughout the course of the project. There is a crossing of College Avenue, and typically that can be accomplished by the contractor just closing one lane at a time to maintain traffic through the project. Dan, correct me at any point if I say something that is incorrect. You're muted, so I can't hear you. But you know, if for any reason something happens to where they would need to do a full closure, that would be coordinated with the city, and they'd have to set up a detour route for that. But fortunately, there's not a great deal of work along College Avenue proper that's going to require extensive or prolonged closures.
I think I've been tagged back in here, Gavin. I was just going to add to that. I mean, part of that will be coordinating with the contractor once they take ownership of the MOT. But we did incorporate a detour route for a short-term closure of College. And as Gavin had said, there may be a chance to avoid that. And if we can avoid that, we will, where you could close half at a time. But, you know, we do have a good crossing at College, putting a big pipe in the ground through a busy intersection. We've got a lot of work adjacent to College as well. So just for contractor safety and efficiency, we do have, I think it's a 30-day closure. And again, it still goes back to Gavin's initial point that there still will be access maintained for all local residents. We just want to limit a lot of that through traffic during that time. But once we get the construction period kicked off with the contractor, we'll have some more detailed discussions with them as far as how they laid out the project, what their plans are, what their sequencing is going to be. But there is a chance that College does get shut down for a short period of time. Again, still maintaining access for local residents.
All right, thank you, Dan. The next question here, and we'll probably need you to bring up the corresponding plan sheet, Dan, but it says, please detail the work that will be done between 84th and College Lane. Will the ditch remain with a pipe next to it? At times, the volume of water going into the 36-inch opening overloads several times during most years. I'm going to speak to that generally, and then I'll let you kind of show them how that's going to work out. But you know, with drainage, you know, anytime we size a new system, you know, we can only size it to a storm of a certain size or a certain magnitude. You know, often the storms are described by their recurrence interval. You know, a storm that typically would recur on a 2-year interval, 10-year interval, 100-year interval. And so there are storms that will exceed the capacity of any system. With new subdivisions, those are often built with detention. You know, that's why you see the ponds and things like that to provide storage for some of those larger events, to hold water so that way it doesn't overwhelm the systems. They also typically build them with emergency flood routing design to where they know the elevation of every home and where that water is going to go in a situation like that. And they actually design the areas like that. For a storm sewer retrofit project like this one, you know, if we could rebuild the entire area again, we would do things differently. Typically, they're actually built by developers and then the infrastructure is accepted by the city. But you don't have opportunities like this to put in a pond. You know, there's not an acre of spare land where we can just drop in a retention pond and things like that. So unfortunately, in some cases, we just are limited in terms of trying to make things better and putting in the best system we can with the limitations that exist in terms of space, in terms of balancing, making things better in existing areas without trying to cause or exacerbate problems downstream. So it really is a balancing act. So with every one of these projects, you know, that's why we go to engineering firms that look at, you know, the capacity, the sizing, the needs, and try to balance all those things to make things better in one area without making it worse elsewhere. Again, with the limitations, knowing that we can't do things like we would in a brand new development where some of those additional measures can be put in. So there are often limitations with some of these projects, but I'll let Dan kind of highlight the area there. And if you can speak to a little bit in terms of how things will come together and function in that area, existing versus proposed, that'd be great.
Yeah, very good. Can everybody still hear me again? Okay, perfect. Yeah, and Gavin hit the nail on the head talking about kind of design periods and return periods. There's always going to be a bigger storm. You know, you might design for a 10-year return period, which is what we've designed for here. So basically the size storm that's going to occur every 10 years. But as we all know,
okay, hang on. This is John Longworth. And I'm talking about what happens at least once a year. And sometimes water comes out of the ditch and goes around both ends of my house on its way back to the creek. So it's like if you're talking about, if you're taking care of things that happen like every 3 years, then it should take care of my problem. But I'm concerned that you're just going to dump more water on us from up north and
Yeah.
just make our problem worse. We about 3 years ago, we had for the first time ever, we had water running in our garage. It had come out of the swales that are at both ends of the house and was running down our driveway and was splashing up and left mud over a foot high on our garage door. And so now we have everything in our garage on stilts just just because of that. So we certainly don't need any more water here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, let me talk about what we're doing here, John, and maybe that'll paint a little clearer on how we're going to handle this. And so right now, what we've got is all of the water from 84th Street north along College. As that includes everything along 84th east of College, everything north. That make us clear up north of 86th Street. It all funnels down into this one open channel here. And I think Ricardo had shown a picture earlier of how this channel kind of gets this sinusoidal wave pattern as it's kind of eroding away. And then there's a 24-inch culvert. It looks like this is your driveway here, John.
yeah, we're the only driveway there, and that picture you had was of one of the light rains.
Yes. Yeah.
I-
You know,
I-
we always try to get out during
That's
A
enough.
rains.
That's enough to stop me from mowing the grass for a few days.
And so what we've got now is, so currently it all runs in this open swale next to College Avenue. And then there's a large, it's like a 5 foot by 5 foot graded inlet structure where all this water has to get in through that graded structure to make it into that 36-inch pipe. And what we're going to do, instead of relying on that one inlet structure, we're actually going to extend up the 36-inch pipe all the way to basically the intersection of 84th and College. And all that's going to be captured into that 36-inch pipe. And so the swale is going to remain here. Your driveway culvert's going to remain, but the only water that's physically making it into the swale would be what's draining off of College. And then there's a 15-inch that runs across College right here. But everything else will be basically taken underground, which again will be a more efficient capture point. It's going to keep it underground and take it out to Holly Creek. There still could be a rain event that does overwhelm that system, but we've bought ourselves, again, more capacity, more time by keeping it underground, getting it basically from point A to point B in a more efficient manner, and not relying on all that to be able to hit this culvert, hit that open, structure there.
Okay, so there's not any greater capacity south of College Lane, though.
There's not, and that's kind of what Gavin was talking about. You're kind of designing within the constraints of that existing system, and it all comes down to budgets and where you draw the line. We do have, it's a good sized pipe, 36-inch pipe that runs here down towards 82nd to an outlet to Holly Creek, and we did model that looking at the 10-year return period for that drainage area. Again, that covers all that, again up to 86th Street and beyond. And so this has been for the 10-year return period. Again, there can always be a bigger storm, but we do feel we've got a much improved capture point that's gonna improve getting water into the system and draining these areas.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether I need to put a dike around my house. So I'm really concerned about it. So we'll see. I just
Well, I'll tell you, I can add one additional thing to what Dan has explained here too. Is in the existing situation, you're relying on that single point of entry into the system right next to your property, and it's also a graded structure. So anytime you got a single graded structure like that, it probably doesn't take a whole lot of debris to start damming things up a little bit. Is that pretty accurate, especially when you get into fall with leaf litter and things like that?
Yeah. It belongs to the neighbor, but we go out and clean it most of the time, although the latest neighbor is a lot more help than some of the previous ones. But
Well, and that's the reality of it is we do
Yeah.
rely on the residents of Indianapolis to help be good stewards of the drains near their property. But as I'm sure you experience routinely, is it doesn't take a whole lot of debris to block up a single drain
we've
like
gone
that.
out there during storms in the rain to help keep it
Mhm.
clear, to keep the
Uh,
water out of the house. So.
I'm sure. So part of what this also does is eliminate that issue and makes a more distributed system. And it's not just multiple inlets distributed throughout this area, but you also have all that additional underground pipe infrastructure, which does provide some capacity. It's not detention per se, but it is underground capacity for this drainage. And it also changes the dynamics of how quickly things move and the peaks and valleys of a given rain event and how the system responds. So, we can't say that, this is absolutely, as Dan said, gonna eliminate, water exceeding the system's capacity in that area. But, that's all part of the engineering and drainage capacity calculation that goes into this, is to try to make sure that we're not making situations like that worse and ideally making them better. So it is our expectation that this will improve that condition in front of your property
All
and
right.
hopefully
Well,
cut down on
yeah.
those types of issues.
Good luck. You'll hear from me if it fails.
Well, you know how to find us, and I know at the end of this
I work near you, near the offices downtown.
oh,
So I can walk over to the city building
yeah.
and
No,
places.
absolutely. I mean, that's the thing is, a lot goes into engineering using best practices, but then sometimes there's the test and there's reality, and,
Yeah,
and we do everything we can to predict that through those means and methods. But um, it's one of those things where sometimes you just gotta have that test to see how close to the mark you came, and based on the history, and that's why we use the methods we do, is they're generally pretty reliable. And
Yeah.
that's why it's how we yeah.
I used to be an agriculture teacher and a farmer years ago, and you have to do drainage and stuff. So I understand some of that. So I
These are just
understand. It just bothers me. So
No, understood, and I can understand that concern. The same principles apply to the tile drainage systems they would put in agriculture, but we
yeah,
do again look at these things and apply those engineering practices and principles, and do expect this to provide a benefit throughout this project area, and we do hope that's the case there. But if we experience issues, then definitely reach out to us, and we'll work through those with you.
okay. So I guess those trees that are shown there just north of College Avenue or College Lane, those will be gone. They block my view, so I won't mind when I'm
Yeah,
going out of the
correct.
driveway.
Any of those trees within public right of way are public forestry assets, and so
Yeah.
we do have to take those down, and we do actually have to replace them at a certain ratio, working with DPW forestry. Though oftentimes we can't put them back in the same locations. It doesn't sound like you want them anyway. We
Well,
have to look
I'm
at.
gonna talk to the neighbor about not putting them back because they're so close to the street that they block the view of traffic, and it's a little harder.
Yeah, well, we have a tree mitigation or replanting plan. We do try to put trees back because India is a Tree City USA and does have goals and requirements for replacing trees in the public right of way. But they try to find places that aren't going to conflict with the new systems that we put in, the infrastructure that exists there, utilities, and then of course we certainly don't want anything that's going to be a vehicular hazard. So we look to our friends.
He was talking about putting some more trees in the yard there, so maybe he'll want them back a little bit, just a few feet anyway.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right, thanks. I think I can shut up. Okay, thanks.
Well, no, we very much appreciate your questions and comments. And again, do contact us if there's anything you'd like to discuss in greater detail offline here outside of this meeting. Looks like we might have a few more questions here. Give me just a second. There's a question about whether there'll be work or yards being impacted between 812 and 818, and that's Rosebay Court. That is correct.
Yeah, it looks like 812 and 818, that's the easement area that we're running through. And Ricardo was able to pull up the questions on his screen. And the other part was, let's see, there'll also be some work in the area between 807 and 815, which is on the south side of the cul-de-sac. And there's going to be a little bit of work there. That's where that existing inlet is, which has been overflowing and running to the south. And so we are going to go ahead and replace that inlet and pull flow to the north. But that's as far as we're going, again, in that area. So just in the easement limits, just beyond the right of way, but nothing there any further south than what you're seeing on this screen here.
That pipe where the inlet is there between 107 and 118 is, I don't know, is it maybe just that it doesn't go out, it's just constantly clogged at the moment, and I think gunk at the bottom of it. Will that be cleaned out so whatever is there can flow out, or will that just naturally clean itself out? How does that work?
Yeah, so what we'll do, so there is, I think we actually did some televising through this area to take a look at those outlets to see where it goes, what it does, and you're exactly right. I think we got the camera about 30 feet down and then it just stopped. And so what we're doing by, again, kind of putting the new inlet there and redirecting all that flow, we're no longer going to be relying on that pipe for anything. And so it's basically going to be abandoned in place. And so once all that stormwater that used to go there is going somewhere else, we've got the surface drainage going somewhere else, and there's no longer a purpose for that pipe. And generally speaking, it's not worth the money and the disruption to go through and dig up that pipe. Again, it'll just be abandoned in place, and we'll cap the end of it, kind of seal it up watertight, but it'll just be left. Good question.
Okay, I have a question about utility coordination here. Coordination with utility companies and the possibility that they will need to move things. How does that work in terms of notifying homeowners of any service interruptions? Generally, those utilities, this question comes up a lot, and utilities are an entity that the city unfortunately doesn't have a great deal of control over. It's one of those things that has plagued and I apologize if there's anybody on here that represents a utility company. They do a lot of work and put forth a lot of time, effort, and expense to work with us on these public projects, because essentially, for the most part, they have to get out of our way if the city wants to use its right of way for public improvements such as these. But the utilities, if they do have to relocate, and there will be some relocations here, including, again, that utility drainage and utility easement corridor between those two properties, as we've discussed, they should be, taking the same approach that we would if there's a direct impact to a property owner, especially a service disruption. That needs to be, they need to be notified in advance. And that would be my expectation that they do so. I mean, these are companies that serve customers and people throughout the city and beyond. So they have their own protocols and practices for how they approach those things. But from a customer service, standpoint, you are a customer of these utilities. They are there because they're serving your home and providing services to you. So I would hope that they would have a similar approach that we do as far as notifying folks, especially if there's going to be a service disruption. On the other hand, sometimes if they're operating within a utility or right of way where they have a right to exist and they shouldn't have a direct impact on you, like a service disruption or blocking access to your home, sometimes they will just do what they're within their rights to do within those realms and do construction work, as long as hopefully they're not restricting access to your home or cutting off service and things of that nature. So for direct impacts, significant impacts, I would hope they contact you directly. Otherwise, if they're just out in easements and right away doing work, they oftentimes just work as they are entitled to within those areas. So I hope that somewhat answers the question, but yes, I hope they're not cutting off anybody's service temporarily without notifying them. I certainly would hope they would not do that. Here's one, Dan, this might be running through the project specifics here. What is the size of the pipe on Rosebay and how far underground will it be placed? I think we have someone that wants to see the profile.
Let's see the profile.
Yeah,
I like it. So in Rosebay, at Rosebay Court, at the upstream end, we start out with a 12-inch pipe. And then as we get further down, we come up to an 18-inch pipe is the largest size we've got. And I was kind of cheating, just showing you the plan view, but I can show you the profile view here as well. So we range at the upstream end, we get pretty shallow. You know, we're in probably that 3-foot depth range, but at our deepest point, we get to, 8-9 feet here at kind of the hump there, just east of College. So again, we tie into the system at College. It's an 18-inch, and then it kind of reduces size as we've got less draining into it. So it's a 15 as we get up to this corner, and then we come on to Rosebay Court, we've got a 12-inch there.
And Dan, actually, you're on the right sheet here. Will you go up to north and west of where you are? The next question is it anticipated the culvert running under Rosebay Drive north to south will be replaced? So apparently that's the one that's silted in there, conveying drainage from north to south under Rosebay Drive just east of College.
Yeah, so what we're going to do, it's kind of similar to what we looked at just a little bit ago at 84th and College. So we're going to basically improve the connection points. And so there's an existing culvert that runs here, it ties into the system. What we're going to do is we're just going to tie that directly into our new storm system. And so there is going to be a new pipe, a new end section that extends north of Rosebay on the east side of College. And I believe it's a 15-inch pipe that will tie in. And again, by getting a better positive outlet, that should limit the reoccurrence of sediment and siltation in that area, because the water shouldn't be sitting for prolonged periods of time like has been experienced.
Okay, and the next question I have, will you please clarify on the timeline of the project? So I can speak to that a bit. We have not even had our pre-construction meeting with the contractor yet where we have their specific schedule, because we have assumptions at how they will tackle this thing. But ultimately, the way things are set up is they have a contract that has certain completion dates in there, and they're contractually bound to meet those, with few exceptions that could cause extensions if things come up during the course of construction. As it stands now, these what we call the substantial completion date, where everything should essentially be done in terms of work out in the field, that's going to be the 16th of September of 22. So we talk generally in terms of a fall completion, and then their final completion is coincidentally Halloween, where we expect them to have all punch list items and little tidy up things done to where everything is completely done. Grass is replanted and things are stabilized. All the pavement work is done and everything by that point. What you guys might start seeing in the field, there are those utility relocations that we've talked about. We've given notices to proceed to utilities. So those utilities, we hope, will be starting work anytime really on relocating, water lines, gas line, telecommunications. We want them out of the way before we start work. So my expectation is over the next 60 to 90 days, they're getting their work completed and wrapped up to get the site ready for our contractor to move in and complete work on the project. There could be some overlap in that if our contractor gets started early and has places they can work without conflicts. So that could start in terms of construction on our storm sewer improvements by the DPW contractor as early as January of next year. I would not expect that. I would expect more of a late February and maybe even into March before our contractor really gets going with work on this project. Now, those are all tentative timelines. We don't have an actual construction schedule submitted from the contractor yet. But again, we would expect some utility relocation work to start anytime on those areas where they need to get out of our way. And then our contractor would move in early next year and get work on the project, and then they need to have it wrapped up and completed by fall. And so with that, I don't have any other questions in the chat.
I see one more in there, Gavin. Just sorry to interrupt. There's one more in there. It's kind of a follow-up about the culvert. It looks like there's a question about the culvert further east on Rosebay near the curve. And so I was just going to pull in and kind of show you this area as well. And so I believe this is a culvert that's being talked about. There's a 15-inch concrete pipe that kind of picks up a little bit of open drainage here. Again, this is getting beyond the city right of way. And that pipe comes into the inlet comes into the swale. And so what we're going to do is we're going to propagate or continue that drainage. But instead of this water coming into the swale, it's going to come straight into our new inlet here and into our storm system. And so we're not actually going to be replacing this pipe or doing any sort of new end section here. That also keeps us from getting into all these trees and landscaping, and also keeps us inside public right of way. But again, we will be picking up that pipe to continue that drainage and get it to a more efficient drain path. So hopefully that answers that last question there.
And just so everybody's seen it, I want to make sure Janelle, our public information officer who has coordinated this meeting for us, has also put her contact information in the chat. So if you have questions that come up after the fact, you can definitely reach out to Janelle and she can get that information for you. Janelle, I also have the project's RPR, basically our inspector. Her name is Leslie Jones. She's with HWC. And we could share her email address if that's helpful at this point, or I don't know if there's any follow-up that we can send to maybe an HOA representative or somebody of that nature. But that is a person that folks can reach out to during construction with construction-related questions. Maybe I'll just put her information in the chat here real quick.
Yeah, this is Steve Wheatley. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Steve.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I don't know if there were any other questions. I just wanted to, on behalf of Rosebay Commons, and I'm thrilled to see so many of our neighbors on the call tonight. I want to thank especially Janelle for putting this together, and for Dan and Gavin and the whole team there. You answered a lot of questions. Personally, I'm cautiously optimistic. We have a lot of hope that this is going to improve the longstanding drainage, storm drainage issues. And I look forward to the project starting. But I want to thank you all for coordinating this.
Well, thank
You're
you. That
very
actually makes
welcome.
me
Thank you.
think of one thing I would like to just say and really ask of everybody. Even with the best contractor and the project with the least surprises, and you try to anticipate every possible thing that could happen, but things do happen. Construction is a messy project, and it can be frustrating, and it can sometimes try people's patience. So I'm just going to ask everybody in advance, we appreciate your patience very much. That the goal here is obviously to come in and make improvements to your neighborhood, to the adjacent neighborhoods, and everywhere we're impacting. And sometimes it can be a little messy getting there, but just give us some time to get it done. We've got a lot of people involved in these projects to make sure it does go right. And when things go wrong, they're also there to make corrections, make adjustments, and make sure that the finished product meets the highest standards and expectations of the city of Indianapolis and everybody else who's worked on this project. So bear with us, but when it's done, we really hope this will be a great benefit to your neighborhood and those living there and your neighbors. So thank you.
Well, I think that you'll find an abundance of patience from our neighborhood, waiting for this long, hopeful improvement to our storm issues. So I thank you very much again.
Mr. Wheatley, are you the main, and maybe, as somebody else, Gavin can answer this. Is there a main, do you have an HO homeowners association?
We do, but I'm the de facto point person on this. So feel free to send any kind of, whether there's a summary or any other information through me, and I will make sure that it gets to the appropriate people.
Okay, because again, I don't have, I'm in charge of helping make sure the contractor is on task. And one of the things that they need to do is update monthly with a schedule. So if that's something that I can send to one person, and then, you can take a look at it and then pass it on, that would be helpful.
That would be fine. And I will make sure that it gets disseminated amongst the homeowners.
Okay.
And real quick, we had a question sneak in here towards the end. When will the trees be taken down near 818 Rosebay Court? That's the again the side yard drainage and utility easement corridor. That needs to be done before like the water line gets relocated. So that's something that will probably happen on the earlier end of the project. So that could be as early as January, but I would think more along a February timeline potentially. But there is an April 1st deadline for tree removal to adhere to the Indiana bat restrictions, which DPW recognizes. So it should be that earlier part of 2022. When we take trees down adjacent to people's property like that, we will put out door hangers just to let people know in advance those trees are coming down. So we'll work with the contractor to make sure that people get a heads up on that before they go in there and start doing that work.
And just to let you know, we are having the pre-construction meeting with the contractor next week. So we'll know more definitely in the next couple of weeks on schedule and so forth. So
Great.
So with that, Janelle, I'm going to pass it back to you for any closing remarks you would like to make. But again, thanks again for all your efforts to put this together and coordinate this meeting. So appreciate all that you do.
Thanks, Gavin. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody from our staff and UC Indy for coming out tonight and presenting this information, and everybody else from the neighborhood for showing up and asking some great questions, because the questions are what the communication process is, and it helps everybody understand what your needs are, our needs are, and things like that. So just really appreciate your input and support as we get through the project. And as Gavin said, construction can be a frustrating thing to have to experience, but you have lots of contacts that you can reach out to here at DPW, and just ask questions, let me know what's going on, and we'll do our best to get the situation resolved, whatever it may be, and get you the information you need. So with that, you have my contact information and Leslie's. So I think we're going to close the meeting for tonight. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We will post this on our website. I'll put the information in the chat here quickly before we go. And it's basically and then you'll want to look for this activity card. And that will be under drainage improvement projects. And just find the Broadway and Rosebay project. And then you can look, if you want to watch the recording or send it to a neighbor who couldn't make it tonight, just refer them to that website, and then they can get up to date as well. But we, again, thank you all for attending and asking some great questions, and we hope you have a good evening. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.